Hello, you're welcome back to my channel. So if you're new here, thanks for stopping by and please do consider subscribing. And if you're a returning subscriber, thanks for always being here. So today we'll be looking at this yellow dress and the focus will be the ruched sleeve, the keyhole and the Caribbean ruffles that it has at its down part. So basically, this is going to be the cutting video. All right, it's going to be a very long video, but permit me to make it into parts. So this is the first part, and I'll be cutting the busy bodies first of the upper part, and the upper part will stop at the hip line. Okay, so on my channel I have a video on how to draft a busy bodies blog, so I'll leave the link in the description box and in the comment section as well, in case you don't know how to go about drafting a busy bodies blog. So basically, I have already drawn out the shoulder line and I made the arm curve. So I'm marking out the half length and the hip line. Remember, this body's part is stopping at the hip line. And at the hip line, I added about 1 inch for the hem allowance. So drawing those lines out, and on my chest line, I am placing 1/4 of my bust measurement plus 3 inches width. 3 inches for ease allowance and 1 inch for seam allowance. So I'll be doing the same thing on the waistline and on the hip line. Now before I cut this out, I will need to increase the waistline a bit with about 1 inch. That's because it's a free dress and I don't want it too cuffy. Okay, so now I'm using my pattern master to just curve it from the chest line to the waistline and all the way to the hip line, and it still looked curvy in my eyes, so I had to just make it a bit straight. And then at the hem here I went up with 1 inch and then I curved it. But at this point I would advise that if you're curving it this way, you use about 2 inches so it will be as curvy as it is in the picture. Now this contouring, this part of the contouring is to give it some balance. So going back to the shoulder line, I have to slant it. Now I skipped it when I started drafting. Okay, so permit me to do my corrections. Like I said, I already have a video, a tutorial on my channel on how to draft a bodies blog. Okay, so it's very detailed and I will leave the link in the description box. So for the neckline of the dress, I'm using 4 inches width and 4 inches depth, and I'm cutting this out. So for the back bodies, I've already drawn out the back center line, and the back center line joining, I'll be using one, I'll be using 2 inches. Now I have to pin this just to keep it in one spot. And for the back bodies, like as usual, it's gonna be 1 inch higher at the shoulder line and ½ inch wider at the arm curve. Okay, and for the neckline, I'll use the neck width of the front, but for the back bodies I'll go down with 3 inches, and that way I'll curve it out. Cutting this out, that becomes our back neckline. So after getting all of that, I will now cut this just as the front bodies. Now for the contouring on the back bodies, I'm simply extending the front bodies half length to the back. Okay, now when I'm making a dress like this, I usually use the back, whatever I have, as the back half length. So that's what I'm using as for the contouring. And at that point I went in with ½ inch and I slanted it to meet the neckline, the back neckline, and the hip line, and then I formed a different, seam allowance. So I'm cutting that out, and that will be it for the contouring, the back contouring. So when I'm done with that, I'll be done with the front and the back bodices. Then for the ruffle part, of the down part of the dress, I will simply measure whatever I have at the hip line here. Remember, we added a lot of ease allowance. So when I measure that out, I'll multiply it by 4, because as it is, we cut this on fold. So multiplying it by 4, I'll multiply it again by 2 for the gathers that I'll be making, for the down part. And there's the piece of it that I am using. I cut it the length of that which we've just calculated, and the width of it was 15 inches plus 2 inches for hem allowance. So that's what I'll be using for the Caribbean ruffle that we have on the dress. So now we'll move over to the sleeve, and I'll be using the piece of the fabric that I have left. I'll fold this into 2, and I'll fold it again into 2. That's because I'm cutting the 2 sleeves together. And for the measurement, I'll be using my sleeve length. Now remember, it's going to be a ruched up sleeve. So if I'm using the full length, and when it's ruched up, it would stop at the elbow. If you want to make it longer than that, of course, you're totally free. So for the sleeve here, remember, around the arm cuff there's no gathers, so you have to be careful so that you won't have excess around the arm cuff, okay, of the sleeve. Now for the sleeve, I have a tutorial on how to draft a basic bodice, okay, so this will just be a run over. So I'm having about 2 inches there, because we'll need a channel for the ropes that we'll be using for the ruching. So I left about 2 inches there, and I marked the bicep length of 5 inches and the sleeve length of 25 inches. Now to contour the sleeve, I went up with 1 inch just to give it some balance, and I curved it from the length to meet that 1 inch. And at the bicep here, I'll measure 1/4 of my bicep measurement, okay, and then I added the 3 inches I used as a ease allowance on the dress, and then 1 inch for the same allowance. So I'm simply curving this to meet the apex, okay, and then I'll slant it from all the allowances that I've added, just to slant it out a little. Now looking at that sleeve is full. Depends on how much of fabric that you have. So if you want it fuller, of course you can make it all, you can make it bigger than this. So I'm cutting this out, and that will be it for the sleeve. Remember, we are cutting 2 of these together. So for the sleeves, I already have a video on my channel on how to draft a basic sleeve, okay, so I'll leave the link in the description box and the comment section as well. So looking at it now, we are done. Remember, we cut the 2 together, and they'll be joining for each of the sleeve. So I'm simply cutting the cuff part out for the front sleeve, the front part of the sleeve. So I'll put it together, and I'll pick it one of the front to one of the back of the sleeve. Hope you understand. And when I'm sewing, I'll join the sleeve first, and we're making the rope later. So that's what the sleeve looks like. And like I said, I'm picking it one to one. Hope that makes sense. I'm picking one of each, the front and the back together. So that's how it is, and that's how it will be sewn. So the next thing we will look at will be the rope with which we will use for the ruching. Okay, so for the rope that we'll be making, I'll need to measure the length of the sleeve. Now I'll be using the length of the sleeve, okay, to cut the rope. Remember, when it is ruched up, of course you will have enough to tie. Okay, so for the rope, I will making for the two sleeves at once. I'll be making for the two sleeves together. So I'll cut it 50 inches long, so that, remember, the sleeve length is 25 inches. So when I cut it into two, of course I will have one for each, so that's what I'm using. And then the width of it, I use 3 inches. So if you like to see the sewing video of this, please subscribe and turn on your notification button. Thank you.